Thank you for joining us on this episode of Hidden Heritage. I'm your host, Paul LaRoche. Our group Brûlé performed for over 3 years at the RFD TV Theater in Branson, Missouri. During that time, I had a chance to meet and work with many American Indian performers. One top performer and champion men's fancy dancer was Michael Roberts, a member of the Choctaw and Chickasaw Nations. I sat down with Michael to listen to his story at length. I learned a lot as he talked about the origin of the men's Native American fancy dance, various tribal history, American Indian drum groups, and family. Following from the year 2010 is that interview.
She hit that. Anato Choctaw Chickasaw Siat. My name is Michael Roberts. My Indian name is Dancing Eagle Feathers. I come from the Choctaw and Chickasaw tribes from Ada, Oklahoma. I dance the men's fancy war dance. Well, there's a lot of stories that are told about the men's fancy war dance or the men's war dance. A lot of them come from the Wild West shows. The story that was told to me comes from my idol. His name's R.G. Harris, somebody that I looked up to for many, many years growing up, molding my life around my ways, watching him dance, everything balance, everything I learned, everything from him when it comes to dancing. The story that he told me, he received from one of his relatives, his uncle. It was said that many years ago that the Comanches, they were a powerful people, and the Poncas were powerful people as well. The Poncas, they had the bow and arrow. The Comanche, they had the horses. And at one time, these guys came together. And out of respect for one another, the Comanches, they gave 4 horses to the Ponca. And out of respect for those horses, those Poncas, they gave the bow and arrow to the Comanches. And once again, out of respect to those Poncas, they made songs for these horses. And they would sing these songs for these horses. And they sung these songs so often that these horses, they started recognizing these songs. And they started dancing to those songs when they were being sung. And the little kids at that time, those young boys, they watched those horses and they watched them how they danced to those songs. And they started taking the movements. And it was told to me that at that time, the elders, they said, don't do that. Don't imitate that horse, But eventually it got to be to where everybody was doing it, and they respected that. And they said that that was something that was good. So they started taking the movements from that horse. After a while, that's where the dance originated from watching those horses. It goes into the Wild West part of the show, though. Back whenever we were being moved into the Indian territories, a lot of our ways was being taken away, our ways of life, our culture, our language, our ceremonies, all of these things were being taken away. We're no longer allowed to do these things. And at that time, Buffalo Bill, he felt that it was good, or he seen that there was books that were being written about the Native American. And in these books, many times they portrayed us as being animals or more like savages. And these books, they were sent off overseas into London and Paris and even the big cities of Washington, Boston, and New York City. These people that read these books, they wanted to see this way of life because they knew very quickly this way of life was coming to an end as well. So this man, he came up with this idea of the Wild West shows. And he came to the Indian territories, picked up young people and took them and showed them off in this circus-type atmosphere. But the people, they were disappointed in what they seen, because they didn't see an animal. They didn't see a savage. What they seen were dignified men, dignified people. When they were coming in, when they were dancing in, their heads were held up high, their chests were out, They danced something similar to that men's straight dance, is what I was told. And those early settlers, those early Europeans that came here, they considered them to be like gentlemen. And that men's straight dance, it's got that name now. It carries that name as a gentleman's dance. So the people, they were disappointed because that wasn't what they read about. So they wanted to see something more. So that's where they came back with that horse dance, that war dance, that fancy dance. Like I said, it's called the fancy dance, that war dance, From what I was told, they brought back things from the war dance, the original war dance, like the feathers on my back. These are called bustles. And the story that I was told, now all tribes, they have different stories about the bustle, how it came to be. things, But the story that I was told is that bustle started with the Omaha people. It originated with them. And that story is that bustle at one time, it was small, and it was made up of eagle feathers, buzzard feathers, hawk feathers, crow feathers, and even sometimes owl feathers. And the reason why they chose those feathers was because after a battle, you could find those birds feasting on the enemy. And they would take these feathers and they would adorn themselves with them. And they would put it in a circular pattern because they say when the Creator is looking down on a battlefield, that's the way that battlefield would be shaped, in that circular pattern. And these feathers, they represent deeds that were done in battle or enemy kills. But this bustle wasn't something that they would wear into battle. It was left at home. And when they would come back and they would imitate the movements that they did in battle, telling those stories, that war dance or that victory dance, they would put this on. Kind of like how our warriors, when they come home now and they have all their ribbons on, they go and they parade in. It's kind of like that same thing, They put this on, letting the people know this is their status in the war society. They've done all of these things in the war society. So they brought that back into this dance as well, the bustles, The headdress that I wear, this is called a porcupine head roach. And this is a sign of aggression. It's made out of the guard hair of a porcupine. The story that I was told, when you encounter a porcupine in the wild, that porcupine will throw up that guard hair, making himself look bigger than what he actually is. What he's telling you is he doesn't want to be messed with. When our warriors go out on a war party, they wear this headdress. If they encounter a tribe they're not warring with at that time, that other tribe would recognize that. They would move off and allow the warriors to go on and fight the people they're intending to fight. Now, our tribe, the Choctaw people, we didn't have this dance. They're adopted. Same way with a lot of the other tribes, Like I said, they say that dance, that bustle started with the Omaha people, and they gave this dance to the other people through adoptions. Our tribe and a lot of other tribes that were moved into Oklahoma, they struggled, and how a lot of us feel is that during this removal into the Indian Territory, they put a lot of enemy tribes next to one another. Purpose for this is that we would annihilate one another. Something else happened instead, though. We were all going through the same hardships, the same struggles. In order to survive, we knew that we had to get along. So we started taking one another in adoption ceremonies. Through these adoption ceremonies, songs, dances, and ceremonies were shared between the tribes. This is how this dance, the men's fancy war dance, came to our tribe through these adoption ceremonies. I started dancing when I could walk. My parents, they would take us to powwows. Growing up, I watched those guys, I had the opportunity. I was able to watch the late Wuji Watchtaker, the original, they say the original, I guess you could say, there was Gus McDonald. There was 7, from what I was told, there was 7 of those boys from Ponca that started that fancy. But Wuji was the one that everybody remembers, that was in the lifetime before me. My idols, they watched him. That was their idol, Wuji, and I had the opportunity to watch him, as a little kid, my idols, what RG is the main, Randy Moore, Joe Boynton, the late Billy McClellan, and, that generation. And then in between that generation and my generation, there's a guy named Dwight White Buffalo, that all of those guys, I consider them to be like my relatives, even though we come from different tribes, through adoptions, through this dance, this brotherhood, I guess you could say, I learned from those men, including Dwight. Even though me and Dwight, we still have run-ins with one another, dancing, the respect that I have for him, the love that I have for him as a brother, it will always be there, because I owe a lot of this style that I have to all 5 of those guys and others out there like that, But growing up, I had the opportunity to watch Wuji in that generation there, and then watch that generation, the next generation, at their prime, at their best, and that's what got me started. I remember as a little kid sitting there watching. I was dancing at that time, but I was I was just a little kid, just being introduced into it, watching and going up and talking to them, respecting, showing that respect towards them. And then in turn, they would talk to me, tell me about these things, tell me about this lifestyle, of dancing, So for me, my generation, to be able to do that, and then also to be able to look at the next generation that's coming up, it's just amazing. There's guys out there now, that next generation, that are good. They're fast, they're quick, and they're bringing so much more into the men's fancy. It's just amazing. So I look at myself as a dancer, and also as an outfit, as the regalia. It's never ending. I'm still learning. I'm still growing as a dancer. And this is something that I look at never ending. I see as when I'm old and when I'm gray, when I'm a grandpa, hopefully I'll still be able to do that, because I remember, Wuji, he was old when he retired, and there was other ones in the Ware family that danced all the way up until, the day that they died, and there was also the Palmer family as well, Dixon Palmer, and those guys, they danced all the way up, they're still dancing as far as I know, last time I seen Dixon Palmer, he was 82 years old and he was dancing fancy. And that was just like, man, that's something else, and I hope that the Creator allows me to do something like that, to continue dancing that long. Well, it would have to be those five. Those in the southern region, it would be those five guys there. Their style, the southern style, is smooth. It's balance. Whatever you do on one side, you do on the other side. Your rocker's going, your footwork's there. It's all style. And all of those guys, they had the utmost class when it come to dancing. When you think of cool, those guys were the ones, they were the cool, you go to a powwow and you think about, when you compare them to cars, those guys would be the Camaros or the Corvettes, those were the guys that were the slick ones, and then when you go up north, then it would be like Damon Brady, late Saunders Fairstale, those guys, their style was completely different, and then you go into, Western United States, Northwestern United States, it was like Rainbow Azure and Tony Brown, and then Merle Smith up in Montana, he's originally from Wyoming. But all of those guys, their styles were completely different from what was down in Oklahoma, their style, up there, like Saunders, his style, even though he was in control of all of his moves and everything like that, he had it where you're watching him and it looked like he was going to fall over, like off balance this way, but it was all controlled, and it had people sitting on the edge of their seats, but the way that they carried themselves, those guys up there and then at home, they conducted themselves in a champion's way or an honorable way, kind of something similar to what, those warriors of way, way back then, they would never boasted about what they did, their accomplishments. They never carried themselves in a negative way. They carried themselves in an honorable, dignified way. And the younger generation, like myself, they always respected us. They took care of us, taught us, this is how, you dance, that balance. They taught us about the dance regalias, what this means, how it came to be. Like you see the colors now, all of that's changed from a long time ago. At one time, it was those basic colors, those eagle feathers, buzzard feathers, and all those things, because of competition. Because we as Native Americans, we've been competitive since the beginning of time. Back in those old days when we played war games against one another, stealing horses, counting coup on one another, stickball with our tribe, all of those things, we were very competitive against one another. Now that we're no longer allowed to do those things, when we come together at those powwows, we compete against one another. It kind of fills that void of competition. We bring our best dancers forward from each tribe. We dance against one another. Because of that, we want to stand out more than the next person. This is the reason why the bright colors. We want to stand out more than the next person. That's a touchy subject. A while back, before I started doing shows, before I was involved with the American Indian Dance Theater and our dance troupe now Anoli, I kind of had a chip on my shoulder. I was one of those guys that would get aggravated by those questions like that, or wanting to touch, because that was a thing about, the difference between our upbringing as Native Americans and the non-Indian. As a young age, as Native Americans, we're taught you don't touch. You don't know what that is. You don't know if that can hurt you or not, but the non-Indian, they're very quick to touch. They want to touch everything. And it used to bother me a whole lot, whenever they used to want to touch, and it still does a little bit, but I've come accustomed to it. They're always going to do that. You can't teach them anything, but, and I was one of those people too, as well, whenever you would hear them hooping and hollering and, the things that they seen on TV, it would bother me. I would get aggravated with it. Being that we've been doing these shows for so long, being that I was involved with the American Indian Dance Theater, I've learned from it. I've learned that it's not that they're ignorant, or you can kind of say that, but it's not a nice way to say it. It's just that they don't know any better. They're only going by what they were taught, by TV. That's their only teaching. Because when you look at history books, you never see any of that stuff in history books. They always say that history is written by the conquerors, and that's the truth. They're the ones that ruled everything. So they wrote the history books. And in the history books, it doesn't say anything about powwows. It doesn't say anything about our ways of life. All it says is about those wars. Everything that they learn about Native Americans is from John Wayne movies, And in those John Wayne movies, a lot of times, those Indians that were in there were told to act this way, So they're only doing what they're told, In my eyes, a lot of them, they could be doing it just to try to see what they can get out of you, to see if they can get you all knotted up, or get a rise out of you, But a lot of times they could be asking it out of respect, just because they don't know, just because they want to know. We've been here for a long time now, we as Native Americans, there's not very many of us left, a lot of them are mixed, myself, I'm mixed, I have a little bit of white blood in me. Not too much, but a little bit, but there's a lot of them that have a lot of white blood in them and a very little bit Indian in them. And they're just trying to connect. They're trying to find that side, So by them asking those questions, we can get onto them, or we can just educate them. And that's the only thing that we can do, is just educate them. It makes us better, makes us stronger as a people, and it makes them stronger. It makes them more wise to what we're doing. My generation, and the generations that follow, like my daughter's generations, you look at their lifestyle, and you look at the way that they live. They have the non-Indian world, where they have computers and all those things, where we didn't have all that whenever I was in high school and junior high and all that. We just had the books and just the regular old stuff, and we had the Indian world, and trying to balance those out. It's pretty hard, but this next generation that's coming up, say like my daughter, she's Choctaw, Chickasaw, Taos Pueblo, and my wife is full-blood Taos Pueblo, and my 3 daughters, they take part in that way of life. They try to go back as often as possible, being that they're in school all the time, and being that, the school doesn't recognize those ceremonies as being something of importance where we live. It's hard for them to get out of school to go home and take part in the dances and the ceremonies at home. But as often as we can, we take them back to Taos, and they participate in that way. Now, that way of life and my way of life is completely different. It's 2 different lifestyles, and then you take the non-Indian way of life with how fast it is now, computers and technology, all that stuff. The kids nowadays, man, it's overwhelming to me, My daughter, my oldest daughter, she's up till almost 12 o'clock at night doing homework, but yet she understands that she has to hold on to these ways, For me, as an individual, I went to school. I graduated from high school. I went to college, did all of that, and held on to these ways. I don't think it's as hard, or I don't think it was as hard as it is now. But I've been a dancer all my life, and I respect that way. I respect the arena. I understand the arena, and my later years, they have started calling on me to be arena director or to help them out to run their powwow, head judge, head singing judge, all those things. Because not only a dancer, but as a singer as well, I've had the opportunity to sing with several different drum groups. Our family drum group was the Little Eagle Singers, and we had that drum group for several years, and we traveled and we made friends with other drum groups. And when everybody came of age, started going and marrying off and having kids of their own, that drum group kind of was put to the side. We figure that one of our kids will pick up that name and carry that name. But since that time, I've had the opportunity to sing with other drum groups, and such as Blackstone. Blackstone was one of my drum groups that I looked up to growing up, and made relations with them, adoptions, and kept close ties with those guys. But other than them, it was like High Noon and Battle River. And, I'm honored, so honored to be able to sing with those three drum groups: Blackstone, High Noon, and Battle River. Being able to be asked to be sung with those guys, I was very honored. But with Battle River, we actually won 3 world championships. I actually won 3 world championships with them. And I consider all those guys within those 3 drums to be relatives as well. That respect that I have for them, And with Blackstone, we've actually branched off, and we have another drum group now called War Scout. And with War Scout, we're doing that same thing. We're taking songs from Cree language, and we also put in some of our songs from other tribes, because War Scout is made up of a whole bunch of different tribes. We bring them together, and we do this, and we travel with one another. Being able to dance with my daughters is the biggest thing. 2 of my daughters dance fancy, and one of them dance traditional. But being able to go out and dance with them on intertribals, of all things, being able to dance with them and share with the people, that is the biggest thing and the most honorable thing that I can say that has been bestowed on me. Being able to do that, continue the next generation.
Thank you for joining us today on Hidden Heritage. I'm your host, Paul LaRoche, reminding you that if you enjoyed the podcast, share us with your friends and help us spread the word. Till next time, from all of us in Brule, thank you.